Okay, faceburgers. Can you name this console? If you said the Nintendo Virtual Boy, give yourself a pat on the back. The Virtual Boy was the brainchild of visionary game and toy inventor Gunpei Yokoi, who had masterminded some of Nintendo's best and most successful products, including the Game & Watch and the Game Boy. Unfortunately, the Virtual Boy wasn't Mr. Yokoi's best work. It looked like a big red pair of goggles sitting on top of an L-shaped tripod, and its controller looked a bit more like an N64 one, except without the analog stick, and it had an extra D-pad. To play the thing, you had to smush your face into the console, being careful not to let any light in the process. And what was in the eye holes, you might ask? Well, this, of course. There were two screens, one for each eye, and using some high-tech optical trickery called parallax, it simulated the kind of three-dimensional effects that you could usually only get at the movies with a pair of blue and red sunglasses. It actually sort of worked, and it did look like objects were moving at you from the background to the foreground. This effect was particularly evident in Mario's Tennis, a game where Kongs, Koopa Troopas, and Toads would serve it up to you from across the other side of the court. The only problem with all of this is that the Virtual Boy could only display one color, red. The searing crimson visuals were not only an eyesore, but they could also cause some unfortunate side effects for some players. If you did manage to endure the migraine-causing, vomit-inducing graphics, the Virtual Boy did have a handful of games, some of which were actually worth playing. Probably the best of these was Wario Land, a side-scrolling platformer featuring Mario's arch-nemesis in a starring role. The game was a straightforward platform game in the tradition of any of the other Wario games that had been out on the Game Boy, and it never really fully utilized the Virtual Boy's 3D capabilities. But it didn't matter much because it was actually one of the few Virtual Boy games to offer any proper, lasting fun. The rest of the console's library was made up of mostly really mediocre games like this. Tellero Boxer was the Virtual Boy's first and only punching simulator. And if you remember Nintendo's classic boxing series Punch-Out, then you'll already know how it played because Tellero Boxer was essentially the same game, only with robots, and not as fun. The main problem was that it was stupid hard, so stupid hard that it was stupid. The difficulty was so rigged in the CPU opponent's favor that you couldn't help but shout obscenities at it, regardless of where you were or who else was around. Oh, hacks! The rest of the Virtual Boy's back catalog is barely worth mentioning. Galactic Pinball was a fairly authentic, but totally dull reproduction of the classic ball game that barely even bothered using the Virtual Boy's 3D features. Mario Clash attempted to resurrect the old-style Mario Bros. Arcade game with a bit of added dimension thanks to another plane of action at the back of the screen, but it wasn't very good. And V-Tetris was just plain old Tetris. Nothing wrong with that, but it mostly avoided using any of the Virtual Boy's unique features. One game that did tackle the 3D capabilities head-on, though, was this.
Here we go!
The appropriately named Red Alarm was one of the most graphically advanced Virtual Boy titles since it featured some proper 3D graphics instead of that pseudo 3D parallax stuff. The game looked and played a lot like Nintendo's own Star Fox series, with you taking control of a bright red wireframe spaceship, tasked with shooting down an armada of other bright red wireframey things, making Red Alarm one of the Virtual Boy's most technologically advanced and fun game titles. And that's about all there is to say about the Virtual Boy. Only 20 or so games were ever released for the console, and after appalling sales in both Japan and North America, Nintendo decided to take the Virtual Boy off of life support in 1996, just 1 year after its launch. In fact, this little red headache was so unpopular in the rest of the world that Ninty didn't even bother releasing it in Australia, which may have been a blessing in disguise.
Okay, it's backwards compatible time, John, but we've got just one problem.
I know, Badge. So much stuff happened in the games industry in the 90s, it's going to be impossible to cover it all.
True, but we do have to try, so let's kick it off with 1990. In the two preceding decades, we'd seen the birth, boom, and then the bust of the video games industry. But by 1990, gaming was back in the black and bigger than ever before.
And it didn't get any better than the biggest game release of 1990, Super Mario Bros. 3 for the NES. The third outing for Nintendo's dungaree-wearing plumber took him back to the Mushroom Kingdom, but this time there were more levels to conquer, more costumes to collect, and more Koopas to crush, and it was brilliant.
For its time, Mario 3 was one of the highest-selling games of all time, and for 8-bit Mario thrills, you still can't beat it.
Speaking of beat it, do you remember the last time Michael Jackson was cool?
I do, Jung. It was the 90s, and in 1990, he had two of the smoothest video games of the decade to his name, both called Moonwalker. While the two versions were very different, they both saw you controlling the gloved one as he danced his way through levels based on many of his best-known film clips, with your aim being to rescue a number of impressionable young children.
Moonwalker came out both in the arcades and on this thing. It's the Sega Mega Drive, and although it had been around for a while in its native Japan, it would take until 1990 for it to hit the rest of the world. You had one of these, didn't you, Bet?
I did, Jung. In fact, in the early to mid-90s, you were one of two things. You were either a Sega man or a Nintendo man, and I was a Sega man. The Mega Drive started out with a lot of old arcade ports like Altered Beast. But it quickly built itself a game library packed full of awesomeness, including a few of my personal favourites like Echo the Dolphin, Another World, and Virtual Racing.
As good a start as 1990 was, things got even better in 1991. Capcom's Street Fighter II came out in the arcades, sparking a coin-operated quarter-circle kicking craze that took every milk bar in the world by storm.
Sid Meier's Civilization series also began its long history in 1991, introducing the world to the empire-building strategy that still dominates the genre today. But what 1991 will really be remembered for is the beginning of gaming's highest profile feud, an epic rivalry the likes of which may never be seen again in the pages of gaming history, a gargantuan grudge match that still burns white hot to this very day and will never, ever, ever end.
Mario vs. Sonic, right? That's right, both the first Sonic the Hedgehog game and the next Mario game, Super Mario World, released within a couple months of each other in 1991, sparking off a mascot battle that helped to further fuel the most brutal console war the games industry has ever seen.
But whichever side you chose, you were getting a great game. Sonic was lightning fast, and it shot by in a blur before your brain had time to compute how much fun you were having. And it also had one of the best game soundtracks ever, which we still can't get out of our heads all these years later.
Meanwhile, Super Mario World was the launch title for the brand new Super Nintendo Entertainment System, which finally made it out of Japan just in time for 1991. Mario World had a slower, more deliberate pace, with an emphasis on conquering an entire island and unlocking all of its many secrets, using a variety of super suits and a little dinosaur called Yoshi.
Over the next couple of years, even more great games came out. The fatalities flew thick and fast when the first Mortal Kombat came out in '92. The real-time strategy genre was birthed when Westwood Studios released Dune 2: The Battle for Arrakis. And the Nazis got a much-deserved taste of chain gun when id Software's groundbreaking Wolfenstein 3D introduced the world to first-person shooters.
In 1993, the next big thing from id Software would change the face of PC gaming forever. It was dark, slightly scary, and exhilarating to play. It was Doom. As a space marine stranded on a demon-infested Martian base, you had to wade through countless zombies, mutant freaks, and whatever the hell this thing is, to eventually get to hell itself to take on the all-powerful cyber demon. Doom really changed the way games were made in the 90s. It introduced the world to deathmatch, and it kicked off a first-person shooting boom that is still riding high today. However, one thing from 1993 that didn't catch on was this. It's called a 3DO, and it was manufactured by a variety of companies, including Panasonic and Sanyo. This one here was made by a company called Gold Star, and although the 3DO was hyped up to be the future of gaming, it really wasn't.
It was the games, wasn't it, Jung? The 3DO just didn't have them, and the ones it did have were really bad, like this one.
Ah, another visitor. Don't be afraid. Be terrified!
Which is probably one of the worst first-person shooters ever.
Thankfully, throughout the middle of the 90s, literally hundreds of good games were released.
Nintendo created one of the all-time best 2D platform adventure games with Super Metroid.
Blizzard Entertainment released the first Warcraft game, Orcs and Humans.
Earthworm Jim became a popular game character for all of about 20 minutes.
Squaresoft's Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI made a big splash in every part of the world, except Australia, since they were never released here.
Peter Molyneux took the God game to the Funhouse with Theme Park, and just way too many more to mention.
By 1995, the game was changing. Sega released their Saturn console early in the year, and the Sony PlayStation also made its debut.
Now, these two machines alone signify the greatest technological leap in home consoles.
They used CDs instead of cartridges, which not only gave developers a huge amount of space to work with, but it also slashed the production costs of making games.
And not only that, but these were the first consoles that were really designed from the start to specialize in 3D graphics, and as a result, games as we know it literally took on a whole new dimension.
The Saturn had games like Yu Suzuki's super technical 3D brawler Virtua Fighter 2, as well as Nights into Dreams, a magical action game that took you into an imaginary world of dreams and nightmares.
Meanwhile, the PlayStation had the likes of button-mashing punch-fest Tekken, the techno-pumping futuristic hover racing of Wipeout, and the marsupial-themed platforming of Crash Bandicoot, and plenty more besides.
Unfortunately for the Saturn, the PlayStation was a fair bit more powerful, had far classier games, and most importantly had a way better marketing department, all things that contributed to the Saturn's untimely demise in 1998. Meanwhile, the PS1 thrived well into the next decade.
The other big console release for the mid-90s was this. It's the Nintendo 64.
Now, I played this bad boy more than anything else during the 90s. The N64 was more powerful and prettier than any of the other consoles, and it definitely had some jaw-droppingly classic games, like the bear and bird platforming antics of Banjo-Kazooie, the suave super spy shenanigans of James Bond in GoldenEye 007.
Super Mario 64, of course, which many people still believe to be the best console game ever made.
Here we go!
Let's not forget my favorite game ever, Badjo, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
The late 90s saw a massive explosion of brilliant and groundbreaking games.
In '96, the first graphical, massively multiplayer online game, Meridian 59.
As we heard earlier in the show, id Software's Quake brought online multiplayer to the masses by being the first game to include internet death matches right out of the box.
Resident Evil made us pee in our pants with a combination of fear and zombie love.
And the first Tomb Raider game inflated the profile of gaming heroines to ridiculous proportions.
By the end of the 90s, we'd played Half-Life and Counter-Strike, Diablo, StarCraft, Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, Soul Calibur, Planescape Torment, and just so many more. In fact, Badjo, I'm gonna make a big call here and say that the 90s is my favorite decade for gaming ever.
Well, this decade's not quite over yet, but I do have to agree with you, Jung. We've mentioned so many great games today, and we've still only scratched the surface, and I think that really says something about how good it was to be a gamer in the 90s.
Games get cancelled all the time. One moment they're an anticipated release with untold potential, and the next moment they've disappeared and we never see or hear from them again. Usually, that is. Of course, there are exceptions, whether it's through a calculated leak onto the interwebs or an accidental one. There are quite a few games that you can play right now that were never meant to see the light of day. Take this, for example.
Hi, I'm Penn Jillette, and this is my partner, Teller. Welcome to our video game.
The illusionist and comedian duo Penn and Teller have always been known for their practical jokes, and their first and only video game, titled Smoke and Mirrors, was no exception. It was a compilation of minigame pranks that you could use to make fools of your friends, including a shooting game where you could make your opponent lose every single round. There were computer clairvoyants that would use phony astrology to trick your friends. There was even a side-scrolling action game where you played Penn and Teller as they tried to debunk a fraudulent illusionist stage show with a guest appearance from legendary rocker Lou Reed.
It's the impossible level, boys. Impossible doesn't mean very difficult. Very difficult is winning the Nobel Prize. Impossible is eating the sun.
But the most notorious of all these minigames was called Desert Bus.
Teller and I want to prepare you for the real world. We want to show you what life is really like. Desert Bus is the first in our line of what we like to call Vera simulators, games stupefyingly like reality.
As a coach line driver, you had to drive a bus from Tucson to Las Vegas through the arid American desert in real time and with a maximum speed limit of 45 miles per hour. The whole trip took about 8 thrilling hours of gameplay with no breaks, after which you'd have to do it all over again for the return journey. Sadly, the game's developer, Absolute Entertainment, went absolutely out of business before they could release the game in 1995. But due to the sneaky leak of a final version of the game, it's still possible to play Smoke and Mirrors today, although we're still not sure if that's a good thing.
Nah.
Not as bizarre, but just as cool was this.
Hi there! I'm your DJ for the tournament, Greg Irwin. You all having fun yet? Enjoy the pleasant background. Danger!
Propeller Arena was one of the last games that Sega were working on for the Dreamcast console back in 2001. It was a competitive airborne shoot-'em-up, where players piloted World War II-era planes as they tried to gun each other out of the skies. However, the whole game was grounded in the aftermath of the September 11 terrorist attacks. Apparently, Sega were particularly concerned that a game that rewarded you for causing mayhem in the skies would not be received well in a post-9/11 world, and decided to hangar the game indefinitely. After some time spent in obscurity, Propeller Arena was of course leaked. A complete version of the game somehow made its way out of Sega headquarters, after which it could finally be played as its creators intended, a brilliant air combat game with dogfighting action. In 1992, a company called Active Enterprises totally plagiarized the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to create a game called Cheetah Men 2, a side-scrolling martial arts game featuring a clan of half-man, half-beast, black-belted abominations. Make no mistake though, this game did not have black belt gameplay. Cheetah Men 2 was riddled to its core with crippling bugs, ugly glitches, and the kind of half-finished game design that completely explains why it was never released, and why its developer went out of business well before the game came out. For some strange reason though, the same can't be said about its soundtrack, which was so good you could breakdance to it. Since the game has been leaked and rediscovered, the Cheetah Men 2 theme song has proved so popular with disc jockeying internet geeks that the feline trio have been immortalized in several beat-pumping remixes. But it's not just small and quirky games that get cancelled on the eve of their completion. In fact, even some of the biggest games in the world get the boot. Star Fox 2, or Starwing 2 as it would have been called in Australia, was supposed to be a direct sequel to Nintendo's original space shooting masterpiece. The game was planned to be released in 1995, but Nintendo had second thoughts. By that stage, Ninty were already hard at work on their Nintendo 64 console, and they decided that releasing Starwing 2 for the SNES would have taken too much attention away from their newest baby, so they canned it. Years down the track and a few leaked prototypes of the game later, and we finally got to see what we were missing out on. And it was pretty awesome. Starwing 2 included several new characters, a map screen that gave you the freedom to plot your own path through the galaxy, and not only that, but it did away with the previous Starwing game's linear level design, and turned it into a more free-flying dogfight. Despite it being cancelled, ideas from Star Wing 2 did eventually make their way into other games in the series, including Lilat Wars for the N64. Just another game that proves if you want to keep a good game down, you'd better lock up the master discs and throw away the key.
The music world has lost a legend with the passing of the king of pop, Michael Jackson. As a musician, he had an immeasurable influence on our airwaves and dance moves. But as an entertainer, he did much more than that, and he even left a significant impression on the world of video gaming, which all started with this. It was loosely based on the feature film of the same name, which featured a compilation of Jackson's songs made into elaborate film clips, including a climactic rendition of his 1987 hit Smooth Criminal. Where Michael actually ends up turning into a giant robot. The movie was good fun, but we think the game was better. It had plenty of button-mashing arcade gameplay, and on the soundtrack were some of Jackson's biggest hits. It also featured many of his classic moves, like the moonwalk, or his trademark hat throw, all of which could be used as deadly attacks. And he could even turn into a giant robot. The arcade Moonwalker game came out at the height of Michael Jackson's fame, and as a result, a home console release was inevitable. But by the time it came to the Sega Mega Drive, something was very different. Gone was the pseudo 3D isometric perspective, and gone too was the beat-em-up gameplay, and in its place was a side-scrolling platformer. And it was really good. So good, in fact, that it still qualifies as one of the Mega Drive's best games. As Michael, you had to rescue kidnapped children from gangsters, street hoods, and zombies, among other baddies. And not only did it feature all the music and action of the original, but it also had more of this. After striking up a relationship with game maker Sega, Jackson continued to collaborate with them to make a new interactive attraction for a chain of amusement parks. Sega developed a ride called Michael Jackson's Scramble Training. It was a giant hydraulically powered flight simulator, and Michael was your pilot. Scramble Training was released into Sega's amusement parks in 1993, an unfortunate year for the troubled pop star. And as the scandalous criminal accusations started flying, Sega quietly removed Scramble Training, and it's never been seen since. With the cumulative years of negative press, you'd think that would be the end of Michael's video game achievements. But 1999 proved to be a big comeback year for Jackson, at least as far as video games were concerned. And he chose to make this comeback in another Sega game, Space Channel 5 for the Dreamcast. The button-mashing rhythm game featured a dancing heroine named Eulala, who had to save the Earth by dancing her way through an alien armada. In the later levels of the game, a character named Space Michael appears briefly to dance alongside Eulala and does a few very familiar dance steps.
Please escape to the control room.
Roger.
Michael in Space proved popular enough to return for the sequel, 2002 Space Channel 5 Part 2.
Space Michael!
Get out of here, Eulala. This is the trap.
This time, Michael had a much bigger role in the game, because this time the aliens had decided to kidnap him first, and Eulala was forced to rescue and recruit him into her dancing troupe to help stop the aliens with the power of dance.
You've got to save Space Michael.
Roger. Let's dance!
Dancing in a game came easy to Michael Jackson. Something that must have been much more difficult was this.
Presenting the King of Pop, Michael
The title's mine. Don't you know who you're messing with?
Ready to Rumble Round 2 came out in the year 2000 for the Dreamcast. It was a boxing game with a very broad sense of humour, and one of its many in-jokes was the appearance of Michael Jackson as an unlockable character. Battle your way through the game twice, and MJ was all yours. Along with appearing as himself, Michael Jackson's music has also been used in many games, including Grand Theft Auto Vice City, which featured Billie Jean, and Guitar Hero World Tour, which featured Beat It. At the time of his passing, Michael and his company were rumoured to be working on a brand new game that was supposed to be ready for Christmas this year to coincide with his planned concert tour. But alas, we're unlikely to see it now. And with that, we've come to the end. His career had both the greatest highs and the most crushing lows. And as it comes to a close, Michael Jackson will certainly be remembered for the surgery, the strangeness, and the scandal, but he'll also be remembered for his music, and for us in particular, his video games. There you are. Today, I'm going to share with you some of the dark magics taught to me by the old gods, strange and mystical spells that mere mortals refer to as cheat codes. But be warned, fair travellers, that these cheat codes serve absolutely no purpose. After all, what need have the gods for immortality hacks? A good first step on the path to pointlessness is Wayne's World on the Game Boy, as it featured some of the most pointless cheats that ever cheated. Like all good cheats, you had to press a secret combination of buttons that would give you access to a hidden unlockable. Mashing the correct sequence of buttons brings up a super cool shot of the lead designer, complete with Yo Tag as further proof of just how mega he was. But wait, there's more. Captain Badical also managed to code his girlfriend into the game. Last, and by all means least, let's not forget the hilarious chum, codename The Engineer. Look, he is actually trapped inside the Game Boy. Oh, the hilarity. While these cheats were entertaining in a sad kind of way, the unlockable commentators in the 1996 Adidas Power Soccer for the PlayStation were genuinely entertaining. A simple button mash in the options screen gave us access to two elderly women apparently having a chat over a cup of tea and a biscuit.
Darling, do you think he's dead? Or just asleep on the job? Yeah.
Of wider but equally pointless appeal are the cosmetic cheats, codes that do nothing except change the way you look, from big hands and small faces to clown suits and leprechauns, and one game had it all.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Ready to Rumble Round 2 punched its way onto the Dreamcast back in 2000, and it featured a ton of body modification cheats. There are codes to give you supersized gloves, turn you into a beefcake, or a deranged zombie. Even more pointless are the costume changes, which unlock automatically on certain dates of the year. Of course, we cheated the cheats and hacksawed our system date to match the holiday of our favourite outfit. For a really pointless cosmetic cheat though, look no further than Wipeout 2097. This futuristic racing game came out for the PlayStation in 1996 and featured a cheat that would make your hovering metal machines transfigure themselves into animal form to make a snail, a bee, and a pig, and other barnyard creatures. Utterly useless. So far, these cheats have all been casually pointless. They don't do anything worthwhile, but they break the monotony and keep things fun. However, some cheats are so completely pointless they make playing the game totally futile, and at the top of that pile is Warcraft 2.
RMU.
If you're the sort of person who gets distracted from their missions by using the hand of God to explode critters, then fear not, help is at hand. Typing Unite the Clans into the chat window results in an instant victory. Less useful are the instant loss codes, cheats so pointless they've been banished to the distant reaches of space and time, to games like 1998's StarCraft. Typing Game Over Man into the chat window does exactly what it says on the tin, resulting in the instant defeat of your forces. Perfect for those moments when you realise you're missing a handful of Batwool for your next hell broth. Speaking of which... Magic! Thank you, fine man.
LucasArts' classic adventure series Monkey Island has had a resurgence of late, with both a new episodic game and a reimagining of the original all coming out around the same time. But LucasArts' adventure legacy isn't just about pirates and primates in the Caribbean Isles. It's also about awesome games like this. The first graphic adventure game that LucasArts ever made was called Labyrinth. Based on the 1986 Jim Henson film of the same name, Labyrinth saw you playing as the film's main character, Sarah, as she attempted to navigate a treacherous maze to rescue her baby brother, who has been kidnapped by David Bowie. Of course, Labyrinth really only paved the way for the real classics, like Maniac Mansion. Coming out in 1987, Maniac Mansion was created by game designer and programmer Ron Gilbert, and it established the style for every LucasArts adventure game to come. It saw you controlling 3 trespassing teenagers as they infiltrated the mansion hideaway of an evil genius, Dr. Fred Edison. It was packed with absurd humor and featured some of the most ridiculous characters and situations in gaming history, including a walking, talking tentacle, and a purple space meteor with plans of world domination. Maniac Mansion also included a new point-and-click interface that featured a selection of verbs at the bottom of the screen, which you had to use to pick up items, open things, use objects, and plenty of other actions that would all help you solve the game's diabolical puzzles. After the success of Maniac Mansion, LucasArts had to make more adventure games. And when you want the very best in high adventure, there's only one man you need turn to: Indiana Jones. Closely following the plot of the 1989 film The Last Crusade, this adventure game featured everything we'd come to expect from Indiana Jones. Nazis, hidden treasures, witty quips, that epic soundtrack, and plenty of opportunities to use Indy's trademark bullwhip. Last Crusade was followed up by a sequel a few years later, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. This time, Indy had to embark on a quest to rediscover the ancient, sunken continent of Atlantis. And once again, the only thing that stands between him and all those lovely archaeological artifacts was a lot of point-and-click puzzles, some ancient gods, and Nazis. Lots and lots of Nazis. Both indie games were instant classics, and they helped to give LucasArts adventure games the same reputation for quality that their films had. Of course, there was one series that pushed that reputation for quality higher than any other title, a little series called Monkey Island. The secret of Monkey Island swashbuckled onto home computers in 1990, introducing us all to Guybrush Threepwood, a naive young landlubber with the dream of becoming a fierce Caribbean pirate. Of course, making that dream come true wasn't easy, especially with the ghost pirate LeChuck on your tail. The bearded blue specter wanted you to join his ghostly ranks to stop you from stealing away his unrequited love, the beautiful Governor Elaine Marley. Like a true pirate, Guybrush stole every gamer's heart and quickly became LucasArts' most treasured adventure game series. It sold by the boatload, and it was followed up by plenty of sequels as well. The point-and-click piracy of Monkey Island was, and probably still is, LucasArts' crowning achievement in video gaming. But they still had plenty of other adventures left in them.
Your name will be cursed forever!
In 1990, they released Loom, a fantasy adventure that followed the trials of Bobbin Threadbare, the last member of a guild of weavers who are trusted with the care of a magical loom. The game was unique in that you didn't solve puzzles by collecting and using items, but instead solved them by playing musical notes on your magical staff.
It's the dragon! Oh, he's
In 1993 came Sam & Max Hit the Road, a thrilling detective caper that saw you controlling a gumshoe hound named Sam and his wisecracking, ultra-violent sidekick called Max.
That was needlessly cryptic.
I'd be peeing my pants if I wore any.
Together, you had to drive across the USA to many weird and wild locations on the trail of a missing Bigfoot. Then, of course, there are the games of Tim Schafer. While he's best known these days as the creator of cult hits Psychonauts and the forthcoming Brutal Legend, he once worked at LucasArts, where he made some of the best games the company has ever produced.
I'm thirsty.
I don't think you should drink that.
After helping Ron Gilbert to make the Monkey Island series, Tim Schafer moved on to his own projects, taking the creative lead on games like the time-traveling Day of the Tentacle.
This must be that Woodstock place Mom and Dad are always talking about.
The hard-riding biker game Full Throttle.
I, fixed your door. It was sticky.
And the most comical look at the afterlife the gaming world has ever seen, Grim Fandango, just to name the best.
I want to go home.
You can't go home, Celso. You're dead. But you're not alone. Everybody here is just as dead as you. That's why we call it the land of the dead.
These days, LucasArts' classic era is a distant memory. The adventure genre has all but vanished, and LucasArts themselves have pretty much abandoned making anything that isn't based on Star Wars. But with the recent resurgence of the Monkey Island series, we could yet be in for an all-new era of adventure. Most game developers go out of their way to avoid gratuitous vulgarity, offensive smut, and humor of incredibly poor taste. But then again, some don't. The next few games wholeheartedly embrace pure tastelessness, so much so that we think they may just be the most tasteless games ever invented. Here comes one now. It's called Booger Man, and it drew its inspiration from that most maligned of bodily fluids, mucus. It came out in 1994 for the Sega Mega Drive and Super Nintendo, and in it you played the role of a caped crusader whose powers of picking and flicking were so developed that the contents of his nostrils could actually kill a man. You had to use your deadly nose nuggets and a bit of phlegm to liberate the Dimension excrement from an evil army of bogeymen. Literally everything about this game was in the poorest of taste, from the way all the game's levels were coated in a dripping green layer of nose butter, to the way you had to teleport yourself around by flushing yourself down toilet bowls. This game was so tasteless that almost everything you did in it was accompanied by the sound of a loud fart. But Booger Man isn't the only video game to be obsessed with flatulence and other more substantial bodily functions, as this next game well and truly confirms. Toilet Kids had the unbelievably tasteless premise of being all about poo-poos. And no, we're not even joking. It came out in 1992 for the NEC PC Engine, an obscure Japanese console that never came out in Australia. Be thankful for that though, good gamers, because it meant that we weren't exposed to a game where the main character is sucked down a toilet and has to poo and pee their way through a treacherous land of flying feces, levitating lavatories, and a lot of other really weird stuff. Moving away temporarily from the realms of toilet humor, however, and we soon find out that even without any bodily functions, there are games out there that find other ways of being totally tasteless. Cho Aniki, for example, is a game series that started way back in 1994, again on the NEC PC Engine, and it featured some of the least subtle sexual innuendo in video game history. You played as Samson, who loves to shoot other semi-nude muscle men with the sparkly lasers that come from a hole in the top of his head. If that wasn't weird enough, almost every single thing in any of the Cho Aniki games was in some way a thinly veiled sexual illusion of the weirdest order, like this. And before you can scrub that image from your mind, we'll get back to what we know best, bodily fluids. Postal 2 came out on the PC in 2003, and although it is still one of the most tactlessly gory games of all time, featuring some of the most stupefyingly gratuitous violence ever produced in video game form, Postal 2 really showed how classy it wasn't when it allowed the player to urinate on anyone and anything within their firing range. A few drops of pee would send most game characters fleeing for the nearest shower and a bar of soap. although some didn't take too kindly to being used as a makeshift water closet. And finally, the award for most tasteless video game we've ever seen goes to this. The Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball series set a new low point for poor taste when it was first released in 2003. The game's premise is dubious right from the start. You have to take a group of gorgeous females with impossibly large assets, dress them up in the skimpiest bikinis you can find, and then let them out onto the sand and let the jiggle physics do the rest.
I did it!
Simply put, these were perving simulators. And while they may have impressed many a teenage boy with their cheap titillation, they didn't impress connoisseurs of good taste and respectability, like us. So watch your step, gamers, because you never know where the next game of incredibly poor taste will pop up, and you wouldn't want to sully your reputation by playing them, would you?
Take two totally different game franchises, smush them together, and what have you got? You've got a crossover, an entire category of games that takes your favorite characters out of one universe and puts them in another. It's become a time-honored tradition in the games industry, and one of the first was this. Alex Kidd in Shinobi World came out in 1990 for the Sega Master System, and it transported the cutesy star of the platforming classic, Alex Kidd in Miracle World, into the seedy ninja-filled land of the arcade game Shinobi. As Alex, you had to do battle with an army of countless feudal assassins, and although it had a little bit of both games in it, it wasn't quite as fun as either of them. We think it needed more ninja. So Kids and Ninjas didn't mix that well, but this next team of crossover stars must have made an even stranger pair when they first arrived in 1993. Battletoads and Double Dragon brought together Zitz, Pimple and Rash, the three amphibian heroes from the Battletoads series, and teamed them up with Billy and Jimmy, the brawling brothers from the arcade classic Double Dragon. As either Toad or Man, you had to biff, sock and kapow your way through several levels of cartoon violence, with some familiar baddies from both series making guest appearances. The unlikely pairing didn't stop Battletoads and Double Dragon from being fantastic button-mashing fun, although the difficulty level was always set super high, making this crossover one for hardcore button mashers only. These days, both the Battletoads and Double Dragon characters are a distant memory, but the next two characters have lost none of their fame, and in fact, their legendary status has only grown with age. Of course, it's Mario and Sonic. Ever since they first established their rivalry in the early 90s, gamers have been wishing for a way to put Nintendo's Plumber and Sega's Spiny Blue Mammal head-to-head to see who would emerge victorious, and Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games did just that. Coming out in 2007 to coincide with the Beijing Olympic Games, this crossover clash saw you running, swimming and trampolining your way to a gold medal and mascot superiority. Of course, the whole thing was a waggle fest. No matter what sport you were attempting, it would invariably involve flailing your arms around like they were on fire. It wasn't exactly the matchup we were all anticipating. We'll get to that one later. Right now, we'll move on to a matchup that nobody expected. Mixing Walt Disney with Final Fantasy may sound like mashup madness, but that's exactly what we got with Kingdom Hearts for the PlayStation 2. Arriving in 2002, this game cast you in the role of Sora, a young boy with the power to wield a giant magical key like a sword. And with a skill like that, you know that adventure isn't far behind. Along the way, you're joined by such Disney legends as Goofy and Donald Duck, and together they have to rescue Mickey Mouse from an evil wizard. Kingdom Hearts was an unexpected success, proving that colliding cultures can work. Of course, all these mascot mashups we've covered so far have all been rare exceptions because, as everyone knows, crossover games almost always take place in the arena of combat. There are way too many to mention individually, so we'll just stick with the best. And when it comes to the best, it doesn't get much better than gaming royalty, the King of Fighters. Starting way back in 1994, this series smooshed together the best characters from SNK's stable of arcade games, including Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, and Ikari Warriors. In fact, after seeing how well the crossover formula worked, SNK's longtime rivals Capcom made their own version, this time mixing their original characters with comic book heroes to kick off the Versus series. X-Men vs. Street Fighter was the first of these. It dropped into the arcades in 1996 and pit the likes of Wolverine, Cyclops and Magneto against Ryu, Ken and M. Bison. Later entries in the series, like Marvel vs. Capcom, would introduce even more characters from both camps, like Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk, and contained even more outrageous super moves. Then, after years of crossing over with other companies, SNK and Capcom decided to cross over with each other in the Capcom vs. SNK series. Even Midway, the creators of Mortal Kombat, eventually got in on the crossover bandwagon with this. Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe was one of the most over-the-top franchise free-for-alls yet, featuring all the fatalities of the MK series, along with the iconic characters of the DC Comics back catalogue, which satisfied our urges to pit Batman against Sub-Zero in a fight to the death. And then there's the daddy of all mascot mashups, Super Smash Bros. Taking the best characters from Nintendo history and locking them in combat, the Smash Bros. Series has always been a Nintendo fan's dream come true. Featuring way too many classic characters to mention, this series has some of the most hectic multiplayer combat of any fighting game. And with as many as 4 players on the screen at once, that's pretty hectic. The latest Smash Bros. Brawl for the Wii even crossed over with a few non-Nintendo characters, with a secret appearance from Metal Gear Solid's lead character Solid Snake, and of course the chance to finally see who would win in a real battle between Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog. So gamers, next time you feel like playing in 2 or more game universes at the same time, keep an eye out for the crossover game. Well, Junk, we've hit 100 and we've had a great time, haven't we?
Yeah, we've played some interesting games, spoken to some interesting people. It's hard to believe that it all started with this.
Good game!
Hello and welcome to the very first Good Game. The show for gamers, by gamers. I'm Junglist.
And I'm Kapowski. On tonight's show, we talk to a master WoW player.
I had been a gamer all my life and always knew that there was an opportunity there for someone to take gaming seriously and create an informative but entertaining program about video gaming, because I knew how much I loved it, and if I loved it that much, I was pretty sure that lots of other people loved it. ABC2 said to me, here's $1,000, make us a pilot.
Hello and welcome to Good Game, the show by gamers, for gamers. I'm Junglist.
And I'm Kapowski, and coming up in today's show, we're going to be talking to the best Quake 4 player in Australia.
So I knew that I had this $1,000, which is not a lot of money, and certainly not enough money to pay real TV presenters to come and work on this. So what can we do? What can we do?
Unable to hire real TV presenters, Good Game settled for the next best thing. Hardcore gamers with absolutely no television experience whatsoever. One was a dashingly handsome young man named Junglist. But there was another, Mike Mikowski, better known to the Good Game viewers as Kapowski.
Junglist and I, we used to work at a call centre together, and from my memories, I had the best times in the studio, a lot of fun. Yeah, that first review, my legs were shaking, my chains were shaking, my rings were kind of falling off my fingers. Aim and movement have all been improved in this game, but let's face it, that's what you'd expect from a next-gen console game. I couldn't remember my lines at all. I'm sure this is probably where the editors are going to start going bloop 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 with lots of different bloopers. Well, since finishing up on the show, I had a bit of a break, but did a bit of travelling and went into the corporate world as well.
Kapowski and I weren't the only stars of the show, because Series 1 of Good Game also included another host.
Good game!
Psst! Gamers! Wanna know how I beat Kapowski every time? In Age of Empires 3?
He was a furry yellow monkey called Peanuts, and even though he was a founding member of the Good Game team, you, the viewers, didn't like him very much.
That's right, Peanuts was such an epic fail that after the first episode we had literally mountains of viewer emails requesting us to give him the sack. So we did this.
Bomb has been planted.
heard from again.
You know, I think I saw him in Series 5, Episode 17. That was this year, wasn't it? Ah! It's the ghost from Peanuts Past! Quick, get the Wii Zapper!
Oh, I can't use it, it's too stupid. Get the GameCube!
He was never heard from again.
Alright, oh, well, yellow exploded primates aside, there was actually something a bit special missing from Series 1, wasn't there, John?
You're right, Badge, there was something special missing from Series 1. Because we didn't get our official Good Game arcade machine until Season 4. I really love that arcade machine. Alright, there was something special missing from Season 1. And here's how that turned out.
Yeah, well, Season 2 was very exciting because we really didn't think when we started Season 1 that there would ever be a Season 2. And then, of course, we got a new presenter in Barjo. And we only knew that we were going to be able to have a new presenter about 2 weeks before we were due on air. So just a typical Good Game way, put it up on the forums. Anyone feel like being a Good Game presenter, this is what you have to do. I think we got 400 to 500 people sending in their little show reels. And I remember watching them all and seeing Barjo's one.
Wise words. Hi there! You know what, being an actor is sometimes a difficult job at the best of times. Often you're sitting by the phone waiting for the next call to come through and forced to take jobs in administration or prostitution. But I'll tell you what, stick around because I'm going to give you a dramatisation of what it's actually like waiting for the next gig. Stick around.
And it was absolutely obvious. I could have employed him just from his show reel, that he was the guy for us.
Felt great to join the Good Game team, Jung, and it wasn't long before we both got stuck into the job at hand, reviewing a bunch of games. Mimics God of War heavily, and the epic battles, the swords on chains, and the action sequences.
Is that such a bad thing?
Well, no, not really, but they did kind of gimp the action sequences. They're too fast, so you can't actually enjoy it. Spider-Man 3 did this as well. I'm giving it 8 out of 10.
We've handed out plenty of rubber chickens since then, and have been joined by a few Good Game regulars.
I got involved with Good Game actually at a LAN party. I was there building a computer for a friend and ran into the crew, and they thought, great, we'd love to have him on the show to build some computers for us. And basically that's what I was doing during the whole first season. The first segment I worked on was build a machine. That was really good. We put together a computer throughout the whole season, showing people, you know, what components to select and how to even install a water cooling system. And then at the end of the season, we gave it away to a lucky viewer. Unfortunately, I left the show to keep going with my studies at university in engineering. But I've also gotten into server virtualization, and I've also started my own custom computer business. You know, just to increase my nerd factor, I also learned how to solve Rubik's Cubes.
La 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 la, so you think you can't game. So after Kapowski left after season 1, the producers sent a call out for new presenters. And I just sent in an audition tape, and we all know that Badger got the job eventually, but the producers still had to sit down and chat with me, and we were just discussing a couple of ideas and came up with hints and tips segment. And so that's how So You Think You Can Game started. The idea was that people could send in questions and I could answer questions on the show and help them out. So since the show ended, I've moved down here to glorious Canberra. And now I'm working in the public service as a patent examiner. So the types of work that I do is people apply for inventions, and I'm the kind of person who looks at it and says if it's new and funky enough to be granted a patent or not. Nothing's really the same as working on Good Game. Until next week, this is Aya, out.
Over the years, we've also celebrated the glorious lineage of gaming culture with segments like Guess the Game and Evolution of a Genre.
Early beat-em-up games were almost always arcade games.
So did you get the name they game for this week?
Did you guess the retro game for this week, gamers?
It was Microsoft Golf.
It was Age of Empires, of course.
And almost every week we've delved nostalgically into the deep reaches of gaming's history and backwards compatible, playing around with everything from the disastrous Power Glove to the triumphant Game & Watch, and heaps more.
And of course, how could we forget all those memorable Ruffle Cups? Although there's a few in there that I think we'd like to forget.
And occasionally we even left the den of gaming and went out into the dreaded sunlight to find stories that were important to gamers.
And sometimes Lux would help us with that too.
Justin Halliday produced the controversial Escape from Woomera.
The military have certainly seen opportunity in this area.
Then at the start of Series 5, Good Game welcomed Ray to the team. Welcome to the team.
I got my start on Good Game after going through a really intensive interviewing process where I had to go up against the likes of David Stratton and a cave woman. Being a field reporter is great because as awesome as the Den of Gaming is, it's really small and sometimes it starts to smell after Bajo and Jung have been in there. The favourite story I've worked on so far has probably been my pinball story because it was just great to see, you know, that people can maintain their geekiness well into their 30s and 40s and 50s. And, you know, so it's reassuring to know that Good Game will still have an audience in the years to come when today's gamers are much older.
Well, that about brings us up to date. And out of those 100 episodes, Jung, what sticks in your mind?
Probably that first ever Raffle Cup. I was proud to help broadcast Australia's first esports match, and we got the chance to pay our respects to a great gaming legend, John Raffle. What about you?
Definitely the Bajang Olympics, Jung. It was the first time I had more fun outdoors on a real sporting field than indoors playing a game.